We'll go ahead and start. The February 17 meeting of the Sandusky City Landmark Commission shall come to order. Roll call, please.
Dr. Berkey?
Present.
Mr. Lawrence?
Here.
Commissioner Meinzer is not on. Mr. Griffiths?
Here.
Mr. Galea?
Here.
Mr. Nagel?
Here.
Mr. Whaley?
Here.
All right, first item, you received a copy of our January minutes. Do we have any changes? If not, may I have a motion to accept?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes as recorded.
Second?
I second the motion.
Who's got it? Did you get it, Kristen? Your volume must be off.
You're muted, Kristen.
I think two people did at the same time, but I got Mr. Whaley. I'm not sure who else said, but.
All right, give it to Mr. Whaley.
Okay.
Okay, all those in agreement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And it's approved. All right, we have two applications for certificates of appropriateness on the agenda. The first is 216 East Water Street. Mr. Horsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have Kelly Van Cowenberg from the owner of Macaroon on the call as well, who can, after I go through the presentation, answer any additional questions. This is a certificate of appropriateness for 3 different exterior alterations on 216 East Water Street. There we go. The building is here today because it's a contributing structure in the downtown Sandusky Historic District. It was originally constructed in 1918, heavily remodeled in 1983. Macaroon, as you may know, is currently located in the rear of Paddle and Climb. They are relocating to this building. The signage that they are proposing is the same pieces that were previously approved by this commission a couple of years ago, which are shown here. The proposed locations are shown in this rough diagram. The awning will go above the door, the projecting sign projecting from the corner of the building, and the applicant has also proposed replacing the metal siding that currently sits above and below the windows with wood paneling painted black to match the signage in the awning. Staff thinks that these proposed changes are acceptable in line with our design guidelines, especially the signage and awning having been previously approved. And with that, staff does recommend approval of the certificate of appropriateness.
Okay, Kelly, do you have any additional comments before we open it up for questions?
Yeah, just Tom said is that we are taking over the alley side of the interior of that building, and we would like to freshen up the front, and that's why we're proposing taking off that green. That green is dented and warped, and we just want to take that down, put up some black trim. And I do, Tom, have the specs from my contractor if you need me to send that to you. And it's really just moving the signage over that people are familiar with that we have currently at the back of Paddle and Climb. So I don't know if there's anything else you need from me.
Questions for Tom or Kelly?
Mr. Chairman, can I make one additional point or two? So I'm sorry. On the proposed rendering here, it shows one side. The application is for replacing both sides of the green, so it'll be matching on both sides, just to point that out. And two, I did recommend in the staff report a condition of the applicant submitting the specs for the material, which Kelly just said that she has to submit. So that was the other piece of the report. Thank you.
Questions, members? If there are no questions, go ahead. Did somebody have a question? Well, staff recommends approval contingent upon the final approval of the replacement material by staff. May I have a motion to approve the application as recommended?
Mr. Chairman, so moved on that proposal.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Any further discussion from members?
Chairman, I'm not sure if this is the proper time, but I do need to abstain. Kelly currently rents the paddle and climb space from me, so I will abstain from this vote, please.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Anything else? If not, roll call, please.
Dr. Berkey?
Yeah.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mr. Griffiths?
Yes.
Mr. Galea?
Yes.
Mr. Nagel?
Yes.
And Mr. Whaley?
Abstain.
Okay, motion is approved. Congratulations, Kelly, and good luck on your move.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Do you need me to stay on this call or can I dip out then? Okay. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it a lot.
Okay, our second application is 101 and 109 East Water Street. Mr. Horsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application is for primarily the vacant lot at 109 East Water. It also would require some modifications to the structure at 101 East Water, known as the Landmark Restaurant. The current lot has been vacant since 2015. The original building, the Phoenix Block, was built in 1849, but due to deterioration was demolished. It's been vacant ever since, and because this lot's in the historic district and the adjoining building is a contributing structure, that's why it's before this commission today. The applicant provided these recently taken pictures of the current view, both from Shoreline Drive and from Water Street, showing the lot. It's been serving as a staging area for the adjacent building's construction progress. But since that's been mostly completed, it's been mostly vacant. I will have these photos here, and on the call is Jeff Foster, the architect, and the Dawson and Dave Beer, the owners, who can provide, I'm sure, additional details about the space. Essentially, it's creating an outdoor dining facility adjacent to Landmark, which would require installing 2 doorways into the eastern side of the Landmark building, and building temporary nature bar areas with shipping containers, restaurant facilities. As you can see in the renderings, also having an overhead awning to protect from sunlight. As you can see, the north side of the structure does come out onto Shoreline Drive. The applicants are proposing to have a shield below, and then as well the steps do overhang above the existing utility equipment behind Landmark Restaurant. Staff did examine this part of the project, and it's within what is on Shoreline Drive called the Amenity Zone, which is the area where the designed primarily for decks, the Tony's is the most recent example that came before this commission. So this would essentially extend out, but the stairwell would extend out the same distance that the Tony's bar does from the back of the building. Staff has communicated to the owners that long-term, this is a parcel that the city would very much like to see a permanent constructed building on. However, in the interim, thought this was an appropriate use of the space, and it included details about the railings that are metal painted black as per our guidelines. So that being said, all things considered, staff does recommend approval of the application. I can answer any other questions from staff's perspectives. And like I said, I'm sure the applicants can give further detail on the program of the space. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the owners. And Jeff, do you have anything else you want to add to Tom's presentation before we open it up for questions?
Yeah, this is Jeff Foster. Tom kind of hit the nail on the head. Obviously, the ownership team has long-term plans for this site, and the discussion began about a month or so ago when Dawson and Dave showed me the plans of what was previously approved. I think it was in 2017. And obviously their objective is not only to make use of the site, but also to take advantage of a larger outdoor dining area, in particular in this location. But, you know, long-term wise, they obviously do have plans to put a building in this location. So as we started to look at what was previously approved, that structure that was approved became clear to us that that was a structure that wasn't meant to be removed. You know, it becomes a permanent structure out of a lot of steel and a lot of concrete. So we wanted to take the approach of an investment that engages the site, brings it back to life, takes care of some outdoor dining opportunities, but is also an investment that, you know, in some years' time can be pretty easily removed to allow for a larger structure to take advantage. But in terms of detail, I think Tom kind of went through all the major pieces and parts. You know, we've got a deck area here where you're repurposing a 40-foot shipping container, which has a bar and 2 restroom locations. It's sidled up alongside the existing kitchen and bar facilities on the interior, so that allows us to serve both areas. And the other modification that he mentioned is putting a door in that side wall so that staff can move back and forth easily. So I'll open it up gladly, Mr. Chair, to questions and such.
Okay, well, we'll get to that in just a moment or two. Before I turn it over to members for any further questions, I have some comments to share and some concerns to express. First, this is an unusual application. With all due respect to the staff recommendation, I'm actually in disagreement that this application is in line with the preservation design guidelines as referenced specifically in the first 2 items. If we go back to those, Item 1 states a property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building, its site, and its environment. And Item 2 states the historic character of the property shall be retained and preserved. I do realize this is a challenge by creating an outside dining area and fulfilling that those standards, and I don't believe at all do they meet those standards. It's just a very incredible stretch to say that they do. So I see a couple of issues. One is, and I want our owners and our architect to understand, this actually goes against our standards, what you're asking us to do. And there's also a danger that we're going to set a precedent by approving this, particularly when it's open-ended. So I spent a considerable amount of time reflecting on this application, and I came to recognize 3 interests that seem to be involved here that converge. The first is obviously the owner's interest in continuing to grow their business in highly unusual times, and I triple underscore unusual. I don't think there's a person that's involved in this meeting that doesn't understand the challenges of operating a business, particularly a restaurant business, in these times. And so we understand that. There's also been, obviously, there's been a substantial decline in tourism as a result of this. We're hoping that's going to come back strong. But I want the owners and to Jeff know that we do support business development. We want to see your business to continue to succeed. The second interest that I thought about was the city's interest, that in the short time, this cleans up a parcel of land that fits better with the energy around our city. But at the same time, in the near future, hopes for a new structure to be built of similar form to the adjacent buildings in an historical setting. And then the third, of course, is our Landmark Commission's interest, and ours is to preserve, protect, and enhance historic properties within the historic district. There's where I get hung up, because this application does not achieve that for our commission. We are a commission that says yes most of the time. We had 11 applications last year. We said yes to 10 of those. So I struggle with this, and I started to ask myself, under what conditions could I bring myself to yes? Under what conditions could we set up a win-win solution for the owners, for the city, and for our commission? And what I came up with is this idea that I'll share with our members and share with the owners and staff, is creating a temporary certificate of approval for a period of 2 years, whereupon you would have the opportunity as owners to reapply at the end of 2 years. The reason I'm saying that is, even though we're in times of economic uncertainty, I would put all my money on a resurgence in the Sandusky downtown area as we come out of COVID. There's so many things going on. So I look for a win-win, trying to give you what you want, trying to give the city a cleaned up and usable property site, and for Landmark, for us to protect our interest in enhancing an historic property within the historic district at a future date when a building is put up. I think we're going to see a lot of change in the next 2 years. That's why I set 2 years out. We're going to see an introduction as we watch just recently the newspaper article regarding the Fike building and the plan to put apartment units in there. We're rapidly increasing the housing and rental stock downtown. Cedar Point, if you think about Cedar Point coming back strong, people are anxious, they're ready to enjoy themselves and spend time at that park. The sports complex is expanding. Within those 2 years, we ought to be close to the reopening of the State Theater, as well as the growth of the BG population at that campus. The city's idea of a major hotel and conference center downtown, all of that, I believe, brings a lot more traffic to downtown, and hopefully a lot of business for the owners who we're discussing this with now, as well as other businesses throughout the community. So that's where I'm at. If I had to vote on this open-ended, without any sense of when we're going to see a building go up, I think I would be shirking my duty. The other members of the commission can speak to this as well. I'm just telling you where I'm at on this. I would have to say no. But if we could come up with a temporary certificate of appropriateness, even though I believe that even goes outside the lines of what we are to do, it recognizes the unusual circumstances we are in and allows a restaurant owner to create conditions, not knowing when we'll come out of COVID, to continue a successful business. It would give us time to, in 2 years, sit down again and listen to what they experienced and what they learned and how to proceed with that property. Those are my thoughts. I'll open it up for members for first questions for our owners or their architect, and as well as commenting on my comments. So please.
I'd like to actually comment on your first concern, because your first concern is actually a good one, sir. You are exactly right on what your board's charge is. There's no question about that. And we took, and here's the approach that we took to that, because we absolutely did take that into account. And in our particular case here, obviously there's not a building there. The building has been gone, so the character of this particular lot is gone. So we looked at it and we said, well, how are we placing the structures and the improvements that we're putting on this site? What is their impact to the surrounding context and to the surrounding buildings? So Tom, if you could flip back to the Water Street view of the existing photos. That's intentionally why we pulled the structures that we're putting in back from the street edge, and we put that fence in and that small black gate along the building line at Water Street. So, and to the other part of that NPS guidelines, it says any changes that you make to a historic property that impact its historic characteristics need to be reversible. So all of the changes that we've made in here, these are all things that are meant to easily be reversed, and they're meant to be removed. So there is no question that the time frame, and you're correct, we didn't come in with a specific time frame that says this is going to be here for X number of years, but all of these improvements are meant to be on a shorter term basis so that they can easily be removed. So I will say that, you know, what we're proposing does have a context within the NPS guidelines, and we could elaborate even farther on that if we needed to.
Members, do you have questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would be in support of this proposal based on in our guide or under certificate of appropriateness for new additions and related construction shall not destroy historic materials or any architectural features of the site, and also that it can be undertaken in such a manner that it can be removed in the future. And I'm comfortable with that, but more on a temporary basis. So I would definitely want to put a stipulation in there that it's, you know, in a certain time frame should be either reapplied or, you know, looked at again before we move forward after that time frame.
Okay. Others?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you. I do think that the timeline is a piece we should have, but potentially a little longer. 2 years is pretty quick, particularly in the business world. My hope is that Dave and Dawson have been expanded rapidly downtown, and demonstrated that they're continuing to grow. This is an opportunity for them to build that revenue to potentially put a permanent structure in there. But certainly I like the fact that it's a temporary. One comparison I look at is is other cities in historic districts which have used very similar for their empty lots. They've turned it into a food truck temporary lot, and you see that with lights and the food trucks and they're like that. So we're really not going that far outside of that. And so that's why I do see it. But I was wondering also if there's a way, as we're talking about timelines, we do have to realize we are in some extraordinary circumstances, and document that this is potentially moving forward during a pandemic, during a time when we need to give everybody the opportunity that they can to continue to stimulate the economy in downtown.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would also be inclined to support this given a renewal period. I tend to be of the view that 2 years might not be long enough as well, and would propose maybe a 5-year turnaround. I do have, I guess, 2 questions. The first one through you is to the owners, actually to staff, and then also if the owners want to comment. I note in the documentation that there is some reference to the fact that staff and/or the city manager have had conversations with the owners about the potential of putting a building on site. Are there any specific details, or more particularly a specific timeline of when the ownership group intends to do that? And if staff would comment, and then if not, I'm happy to hear from the owners in that regard. And then my second question, I guess, and I know we don't have the law director here, but perhaps Mr. Galea would have a comment, is just on a point of order as to our ability to propose a time limit to this certificate. So I'm not sure where we stand legally on that particular one.
Mr. Chairman, through to Mr. Curvis, Actually, Brendan, our law director, is on the line, so I'm sure he would
Okay, great.
work to give us some comment there. I would defer to the owners, Dave and Dawson, on the question about buildings. As Mr. Foster said, there was a previous approval for a building on the structure a number of years ago through the city, but as to any timeline for future plans, I would defer to the owners on that question.
Well, once again, can you hear me? As Jeff has stated, we started with the original plans that were approved. I don't know what time frame, but several years back. We just tried to make it a little more temporary and make it, in our opinion, match the downtown district more than what we felt the original plans did. I respect your position, all of your positions and your comments. I think what has to be taken into consideration is, these are definitely different and interesting times in the past year, but at the same time, building is as expensive as it's ever been, along with materials. So this isn't like putting a deck behind your house. This is a pretty substantial investment. I mean, so I don't know time frame wise what would work for us in both sides of it. In what kind of a time frame would we be willing to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars? On taking a chance of whether you reapprove it or not. B, once again, when you go back to the times of summer, who knows if everything that the gentleman brought up earlier is going to happen in the city, or how fast it's going to happen in the city. And when you're talking a building, you're talking multiple millions of dollars. Those are all things that we took into consideration.
Other comments? I guess my concern is what's long-term. And looking at our charge as a commission, I think we would be negligent if we didn't have a time frame involved. And it doesn't mean it all ends at the end of the time frame. What we're saying is you could come back and reapply. We all would have a better sense of the economic conditions, whether it be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. We would all have a much better sense of the economic conditions. You as businessmen would have a much better sense of break even and the revenue that you're generating up to that point. I still have a concern about setting a precedent without some sort of stipulation involved, because we will get questioned about this. We will get phone calls about why a temporary site is being built rather than a building. And I think we've got to be ready as members to respond to that. And I think what would give us strength in responding to that is that it is in fact temporary, and that we have we've got a process built in place where we can review it and come back to it and see where we're at. Without that, I just couldn't support this.
If I may, through the chair, just make a brief statement.
Sure.
Okay, this is Eric. I'm the city manager of Sandusky, and this is more in response to what Alan's comment was about conversations between the city and the property owner. We have had some discussions with the property owner about the longer term plans for this site, as well as these current plans for it. And I am just as optimistic about Sandusky's future as the chairman was in his initial comments. We wouldn't be continuing to try to stimulate investment and push projects like FIKE forward and supporting things like the State Theater So I agree that in the long term, we should have higher ambitions for this site, both as it relates to the charge of the Landmark Commission, as well as what is in the best long-term interests of the city. But I also do think that if there is a way to do this with a longer horizon, and I won't speak to what that term of years should be, that allows the short-term investment to take place in a way that, as the chairman mentioned, allows us to eliminate the blight from the center of the downtown, while it also allows, during this unique and peculiar age of COVID, additional outdoor seating for the business so the business can thrive, but gives them enough time to amortize that investment. Because while I am completely bullish as to the long-term ability to put a beautiful new building here, I think if we rush that, you may get a lesser building on the site than what in the long term the city deserves and what this site deserves. And secondarily, just to state that, while the market dynamics in downtown Sandusky have shifted, these are still incredibly difficult deals to do. And this is a somewhat irregular site with the buildings, it's a tight site with buildings on both sides. And I think allowing some time for market maturation to take place here is a positive from the perspective that, one, you get the blight eliminated, two, you support the businesses, as the chairman stated, but three, you allow whatever happens here to happen once the market has matured slightly, to be in this spot. My hope is that we won't have to deal with these vacant sites in this close to the core of downtown again for a long, long time, particularly in these 2 blocks of water and shoreline. And so when we do replace this, I want it to be something that is incredible and deserving of being the only new building in these 2 blocks. So I do think the market needs a little time before it is ready for that. So whatever, I defer to the commission and to those who would determine what that timeline should be. But I like the concept of a timeline or a short-term timeline, but I do think it needs to be long enough to get us to that next phase where the building is viable and this investment is then recouped by the owners.
Okay. Let's get some input from the owners as well as the members on timeline.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
It's Mike Mainzer.
Mike.
The back of my head, with the plan for downtown with the streetscape going in and maybe the Mylander Plaza renovations and all the public money that's going in downtown, I don't think that this would set well in the long run, this viewing. I like the idea of 2 years and reevaluate in 2 years. I'm not sure that the owners can recover their costs in 2 years of putting this up, but I think 2 years is a good time to reevaluate it. And I think the question was thrown out to maybe to Mr. Heil is this enforceable, putting a 2-year reevaluation clause in here?
And this is Mr. Heil, your law director. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. My mic is terrible. I don't want to say definitively one way or the other, but Commissioner Meisner, I actually share your concern as to whether or not we would be able to enforce some sort of sunset provision on the certificate of appropriateness, which is what's before the commission. Ultimately, it does go to the city commission, but again, there's nothing in the landmark ordinance that kind of provides this sort of authority to automatically revoke the certificate that you've just granted down the road. I'm happy to look into it and give the Landmark Commission an official opinion, but this would definitely be a very unique approach, and it may be that we do have the authority to enforce it, but I also share that concern.
Brandon, react to the opinion that in the absence of that, what prevents us from creating a temporary certificate? Because we have no language specific to that.
Right. but I think the Landmark Commission has expressly defined obligations and duties under its ordinance. And if we applied your logic, its remit could be very, very, very vast if it's not confined to what it's allowed to do in the ordinance.
And that would put, I'll speak for myself, that would put me back to, I couldn't see my way through this without some time element.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So if 2 years isn't enforceable, 5 years isn't enforceable. So is an option to table this at this meeting and get some more concrete answers on this?
I concur, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And I think we asked the law director for a definitive view on this.
Okay.
Happy to provide that.
Through the chair, could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Would it be possible to, if the law director does come back and says that he doesn't believe that, one answer is that they believe that there could be a temporary stamp on this. If he says that we don't believe we can do a temporary stamp, is there anything that would allow there to be an agreement between the developer and the Landmark Commission and or the city commissioner staff that would say they would come back to the Landmark Commission from time to time, every 2 years, for example, to give their long-term plan? So while it may not necessarily, something to put the onus of them to develop longer-term plans, even if this couldn't be revoked, if not temporary, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's valuable or gives enough teeth is what you're thinking or not, but at the very least, there could be some proactive responsibility or commitment on the behalf of the owners to continue to talk with this group about what their long-term plans for the site are.
I've got a question for Brandon, and that would be since the city commissioners create the rules, what would prevent the city commissioners from creating a new rule that would allow for temporary certificates of appropriateness? Could they not create that rule? Do they not have the power to do that?
My guess would be they would. Additionally, I think City Commission, unlike the Landmark Commission, has a bit more authority to put conditions on applications and ordinances that it passes. So depending on where this goes after the Landmark Commission, I could see the City Commission, because it is the legislative body of the city, has a lot more authority to be creative, let's say.
Right, to create the rule.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could we approve the certificate of appropriateness tonight to keep things moving in the right direction with the contingency that the city commission would have to place a temporary time frame on there?
I'd ask our law director to comment on that.
If you want to make the certificate of appropriateness,
Not hearing you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay. If the Landmark Commission wants to pass this certificate of appropriateness as is, and wants to also include in its like a communication to the city commission, that its recommendation be that the city commission place some limitations on this, I think that would probably be fine. I'm just concerned that the Landmark Commission can't actually place any enforceable limitation temporally. But again, we're happy to look into this and get a firmer answer rather than just discussing it on the call, if that's helpful.
Right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I actually think our position as a Landmark Commission is that we'd obviously have to vote on it, but if the commission is minded not to approve this application without some sort of finite or at least temporal limitations on the existence of the structure, it would be then our responsibility to deny this, but then to encourage the owner to apply to the city commission through the appeals process that exists in order to have the city commission weigh in on this. I don't, that would be my view.
So from the applicant's perspective, I'd like to ask a question of the committee or the chair or whoever wants to answer it. But with our application that you've got before us, you know, there's obviously a deck element. There's an outdoor seating and an outdoor dining element. There's a structure element, which is the shipping container, and then there's a last element, which is the sunscreen. And if I look at removing the sunscreen, and if I remove the outdoor bar and the shipping container, and I have a deck and an outdoor seating, and I ask what really is the reservation of the committee about what precedent this sets? Because I've heard a couple comments about precedent, and you have outdoor dining downtown, you have outdoor decks downtown. What is it about this application that gives such pause?
It's the precedent that our charge is really to see another building go up. We're not in the business of creating new structures that don't fit the historic elements of that street, of the adjoining buildings. That's our charge. So it's nothing against your design. It's more that the charge of this committee is really historic preservation of the environment. And as Commissioner Meisner says, I assure you that when this goes up, we will get concerns expressed. Nothing derogatory about what you've designed at all. It's a beautiful design. The question is the fit. Does it fit the historic district for a permanent structure? And to that, I say it doesn't.
And through the chair, I have to leave in a minute to attend my kid's basketball game. But I guess the question that I have as we look at potential city commission involvement is, how do we find the balance? Because, even if we can prohibit them from putting this there, we cannot force them to put a building there, and so how do we find the balance that you talked about earlier in your, and I guess that's the question of, is there a city commission action? Because, I agree that none of us in the long term, whether that's a 3-year period, a 5-year period, a 10-year period, whatever it is, want to see this stay without a building there. But we also don't want to see it stay in its current condition because we can't find common ground. And so the question becomes, how do we find that common ground, I guess?
Yeah, I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to say no to this. But I also feel a need to protect the very purpose of the Landmark Commission, and thus I feel that the solution to this is to reach out to the owners and say, look, let's give you 5 years, whatever it is, and come back and re-examine it. Because I've lived in other cities and I've heard stories here years back where handshake deals were made. I'm not talking about present administration, but handshake deals were made and then not fulfilled. And I've heard those stories. And it's not a lack of trust, please believe me, of the owners. It's our duty and our responsibility to make sure that this broken tooth in a very beautiful part of the downtown district that looks out over the water gets filled in. And so I guess in my mind, and this is, I guess our law director has to give us some guidance on this, but I would, if possible, if he's saying it's okay to approve this with a limit on it, given, and at the same time, requesting the city commissioners develop some rule that allows us to do that, I would be fine with that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just because I have 2 roles, when the building first fell, I, not being a architect or engineer or whatever, historian like Tom, but I thought that place, as a city commissioner, that would be a great place for a terraced like type dining area, outdoor, a little more permanent structure that would fit in with the environment downtown, and you could, tear it down to the street below. I mean, that's going to be a significant cost. I mean, if that happened, I think if I was looking at a drawing like that as a city commissioner, I might be more inclined to say yes. As far as my role on Landmark, I agree with you. 2 years from now, we should reevaluate it, because if that's what our job is on this commission, we should look at it from that perspective. But as a city commissioner, I wouldn't be, I just know, and I'm not saying like handshake deals, but how things go and how things get passed and how things let go. And 2 years turns into 10 years into 15 years. So I really like to nail this down, and I'm still not opposed to tabling it until we got a more concrete answer going. But we could address it at the commission table, I guess.
What is the wishes of the rest of the commission?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have actually a question for either Jeff or one of the owners. I mean, we're talking about timelines. Would they even be comfortable with the timeline? I mean, this could be, it's 5 years, something that we could potentially work with. Do you have the ability to answer that now? Because we are putting, say it does work. We're saying, hey guys, you got to spend this much money in 5 years. So I just think I want to make sure that they're comfortable with this discussion even had, to talk about that. Maybe Dave or Dawson or Jeff. I mean,
I would leave that comment to Dawson or to Dave, obviously, since it being the ownership of it.
I mean, the time frame would have to be, in our opinion, longer than 5 years, only because of the unknown. Like I said, it's going to be a substantial investment up front. And if everything doesn't come through the way everybody thinks it may, downtown, I mean, we hope it does, of course, because we have several other businesses. Then it's going to be a couple of more years. I mean, our intentions are not to make this a 20-year deal, but to say I'm going to have, the city's going to put us in a position with everything going on around to invest. I mean, you're not talking, of course, $1 or $2 million for a building. You're talking probably 10, 15, 20. So, I mean, for me to sit here and give you a time frame would be unfair to you, quite honestly.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
And see, that's where I'm a bit conflicted. I don't want to put the owners in a bad position. Now, that being said, a long time frame doesn't scare me. But what scares me more is, and I do think that we have our important role. We are not talking about an existing building. We're not talking about improvements to an existing building. We are talking about a chunk of mud in downtown Sandusky that we have the potential to make that remain a chunk of mud, and I hate to see that. And I want to do what we can to make sure that doesn't stay, because I mean, Dawson had a very good point. To replace that building there is an investment that I don't think too many folks looking at downtown Sandusky right now would be willing to make. We can see where we're at with the struggle with the Cook building and things like that in the past. I don't think a $10 million plus $1 million elevator plus fire code plus this plus that is something that anybody's going to be able to make right away. And so if we're not careful here, we could have I actually referred to it as the Gap for a long time. Downtown Sandusky's first and only Gap store. I know it's a bad joke, but that is something to think about. I would hate to have that sit there like that for another 4 or 5 years while everything around it is looking great.
So Ryan, what would you propose?
I want to know if I think Commissioner Meinzer said it best. If we can approve something here and make a recommendation with the city commission to put a longer time frame on this, I'd be comfortable with that. However, I don't want to put a time frame on something if it's not, if the owners are going to say, well, I it's 10 years, but that doesn't make me comfortable. Then it's kind of a moot point.
So you would leave the time frame up to the city commissioners to decide?
With our recommendation, yes.
Okay, so what would your recommendation be?
I think probably around 7 years.
Okay.
I just, with what it takes from my experience in bars and restaurants, I'm just kind of roughly talking about numbers.
Okay. And I think our intent is not to say at the end of 7 years, you must put up a building. It's revisit it.
Correct.
Sit down and discuss. It's
we'll
not
so much more info.
It's not as though we're void of business requirements, things like break evens. We understand that, but this gives us an opportunity to sit down with you and say, okay, where are we at? What have we learned? What are your projections? And try to hammer out a reasonable agreement.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of comments, if I may. I think, certainly personally, and I suspect the commission would share this view, is that if long-term, 20 years from now, there was a building in that space that we all thought was the building that should be there, that we would like to see there now, I certainly would regard that as a win in the broader context of what we're trying to do. So when it comes to timeframes, I think we need to take a long view in terms of the development of downtown and the preservation / restoration of our architectural heritage. Would I like to see it happen quicker? Sure, I would. But, I'm trying to be realistic about the economics here. The second point I'd make is it may be that rather than saying, hey, we're going to limit this to 7 years or 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is, that we kind of do it the other way around, which is to say, hey, we're going to ask the ownership group to come back to us 5 years from now, not for approval, but for the option for the commission, if they choose to, if you like, vote in the negative, if that makes sense. So we're not saying we want a new approval, but unless the majority of the commission votes against it, it would be automatically approved for another term, and that term could be the same as the first one, or it could be longer or shorter, or whatever we decide, so that the expectation for the ownership team is that unless they're coming back and saying, hey, we're ready to build now, where we have an investor who wants to purchase the property and build, we're asking you to extend, if you like, or continue the same agreement for another term. So I haven't worded that very well, but
let me give it a shot at it. So are you saying, Alan, we would say, let's say if it was 5 years, at the end of 5 years, it automatically renews as long as the commission doesn't vote to the negative?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. I'm assuming we still need to get legal clarification on our ability to do that.
I would think so, but it may be that we can pass it and then, have the law director either say, yeah, that was okay, or no, it wasn't, and refer it to the commission.
Okay.
Yeah, this is your law director. I'm okay with that option. Additionally, really the issue with any time frame, my concern is not that you can't pass it today and make that recommendation. It's just whether or not it would have any legal effect. So yeah, by all means, I am perfectly comfortable with you all crafting the certificate of appropriateness however you want to do that, sending it to commission that way, and in the interim, we can also provide an opinion on how enforceable and everything we think this is.
Okay. Any other members want to comment?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think my biggest problem is the word temporary and no time frame. maybe we can have a special meeting in 2 weeks. If we're going to address this, table it for 2 weeks. But temporary and time frame without a time frame just doesn't make sense to me. I think that the owners may be inclined to put a little more money into this to match the streetscape and the Minelander Plaza and some sort of plaza or something if it was permanent. So being temporary, they don't want to put a lot of money in it. And without a time frame, the city doesn't want to say temporary, I would think, but that's just my point of view.
Others?
So one comment I'd like to make on redevelopment opportunities is as it stands now, the landmark building with its 3 stories, the second and third stories of that building are really not used at all now. There's only one stair up there, and they're in pretty poor condition. So, I've talked with ownership a lot about the opportunity that this site gives to utilizing the rest of the landmark building. So from an ownership standpoint, there is an advantage to them to develop this into a building. So to the commissioner's point, the more dollars that we spend now just prolongs that time frame that a building can be put in, because adding some structure here enables us to engage the upper 2 stories of the landmark building, which really is a landmark on the corner here next to Minelander Plaza. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. So I guess we're looking at a time frame. We have a commissioner who wants to make a recommendation, a commission member.
Mr. Chairman, I would say like a recommendation of 5 or 7 years, if we could use that type of time frame.
About the rest of you.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I think 5 is a fair number.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see 5 with the, with the proviso on renewal that I mentioned earlier.
Right. Anyone else? So let me take an attempt at this. So what we would be saying is a motion to approve the plan, 5 years renewable, at which time we would reconvene a meeting, invite the owners and their representatives, and it would be automatically renewed at that meeting unless a majority of the members vote to the negative.
Gentlemen, can I say something, if you don't mind? This is Dawson, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just going to be as upfront as I can. We're not going to be willing to invest the type of money we're going to have to invest and be locked into a 5-year. I mean, I realize we come back in front of you folks and it's not a denial, but you're asking us once again to invest several $100,000. And I don't mean 1 or 2 for a 5-year plan of hoping the city goes, in the right direction of all these different additions that are coming and so on and so on. One of the things we really looked at with this, quite honestly, now is probably not the time to invest after what we've been through for the last couple of years. Well, year and a half, I should say. Probably going through this year. But the option is, unfortunately, it's going to be an orange fenced mud pit. I really don't know what else to say. So, we feel from our perspective that we're really going above and beyond to dress it up and use it and make it really fit into downtown until we're able to spend millions. I have to believe it's tens, probably light, on putting a permanent structure there. So, we realized we were going to have to come in front of Landmark. I appreciate what Landmark does. but we've tried to cater to everybody in this. And realistically, we feel like we're the only people that are sticking our necks out. And, you know, to ask somebody to invest on an if in 5 years, I'll be honest with you, it's not going to work. So, you know, I just don't want you guys to waste a bunch of time. And that's kind of where we stand. I mean, you know, I really think what may be missed here, quite honestly, with no respect whatsoever, no disrespect, I should say, is the type of investment. When somebody says they may be willing to invest more, find somebody that's going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a beautiful landscape / deck in the hopes that they're going to retrieve their money. And quite honestly, I think that's what's really being missed here. This isn't, you know, a $20,000, $50,000 deck.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dawson. But and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think even with COVID, the downtown investment has not missed a beat. It continues to be strong and vital. So we're pretty optimistic that we're going to continue to see further development downtown at a pretty good pace. What we're saying is sit down with this every 5 years and let's see where we're at. I can't imagine that 5 years from now, and I'm betting on Sandusky. I think we're going to see tremendous growth over the next 5 years. I can't see us sitting down in 5 years and saying, oh, let's vote no on this. I think what we want to know is that you've got a long-term commitment to put up a building. And I understand the risk. We face risk as well by, you know, if we just say, yeah, go ahead and do this with no end in sight, we're taking a risk. We're actually going outside of what we're supposed to do as a commission. So we're trying to work through this with you.
Yeah, and I respect that. I really do. But I think our investment is pretty evident downtown. And we're up to what, 4 buildings, 5 buildings, and 2 lots. So I mean, we're as invested in downtown as anybody or most.
Yeah, and also we wouldn't be asking you. It would be foolish of us to ask you to take on a financial risk beyond what you could afford to do as a business. We're not going to do that.
Well, the issue that I think we have is if you go, and you know, it's funny, we were having this conversation with Eric and John a couple of weeks ago. You know, we talked about where the city was and the failures that we've seen in the last 15, 20, 30, 40 years because we're both born and raised here. So where I respect your guys' position at this point, in 5 years, there could be a whole different commission and a whole different group of landmark committeemen that don't, you know, they may have some completely different view, if you will. I mean, I don't know, but it's still a substantial investment for that. And when you talk about the growth of downtown, you know, it's great, but I don't think you're going to find a restaurant or bar that's really excited about this past year and very uncertain on where they're going this year.
Mr. Chairman.
So I expect that you're trying to get it to, we're working together on this, but once again, it's a very substantial investment for us to take a chance on who's going to be making this decision in 5 years.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Dawson. Dawson, it's Alan. I guess my question for you is, you know, the commission is pretty set on imposing a timeline at some level here. Is there a timeline that works for you? Is it 10 years? Is it 12? Is it 50? You know, are you asking us for 50? Like, is there a number of years that is acceptable to you that we could consider?
I mean, let's start at 15. I mean, I would think if we were somewhere 10 plus years, you know, that would give us enough of an opportunity to to use the space that we're spending the money on, see if everything comes into effect, because there are a lot of great things that are planned in the future, from the streetscape to the hotel, as was mentioned. The State Theater opening back up, which of course has not been a great help to the restaurants and bars, especially in this block. So, I mean, it has to be much more substantial than 5. We didn't come into this, unfortunately, looking at, what's our investment, what's our timeline, et cetera. So, we're kind of shooting from the hip on that, quite honestly, Alan.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd maybe propose that we look at a 10-year timeline with renewable every 5 years, unless the commission votes otherwise. And if we want to minute the idea that perhaps it, would be this commission's view that 20 years from now we'd be looking at having a building in place there, then I think we minute that as part of our deliberations.
So let me clarify, Alan, you're saying 10 years and then at the 10th year, we review it every 5, starting with the 10th year?
Correct.
Okay. Other members, you want to comment on Alan's statement?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I can see myself supporting what Alan proposes.
Okay. And I also want to make sure that our owners understand that whatever we do this evening is appealable. It's not final unless you choose within 10 days to appeal it. So are we ready for a motion surrounding Alan's idea of 10 years and renewable every 5, starting in the 10th year? Alan, do you want to make a motion?
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the certificate of appropriateness subject to it being reviewed 10 years from the time of approval, and that at that review and subsequently 5 years thereafter, with the a vote of the majority of the commission to disapprove at that time being required in order to end, if you like, the timeline of the certificate of appropriateness.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, my only comment at this point would be, obviously, this is subject to review by the law director and potential action by the city commission.
Yes. Any other comments? Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
please. Go ahead.
Question for the architect. What is this deck material being proposed to be?
So Tom, if you could flip back a couple slides to the plan, there's 2 different materials proposed. What you have up by along the water streets at the bottom of the page, we have on-grade pavers for the first 20 feet along Water Street, and then everything back from that is a wood deck. So it's a wood deck with Trex covering.
So it's wood joist with a composite Trex decking on it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Any other questions or comments, discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Dr. Berkey,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Meiser,
Yes.
Mr. Griffiths,
Yes.
Mr. Galea, is Mr. Galea there?
We may have lost him.
Okay.
Looks like he dropped off.
Mr. Nagel,
Yes.
Mr. Whaley,
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. So next steps, Tom, you'll be in touch with our law director and we need to keep our owners posted on what we discover. They need to also understand that they have 10 days in which to appeal our decision. And with all that, we do sincerely wish you the best with this project. We're supportive of what you're trying to do, and we'll try to work with you as best we can. Let's all hope that COVID escapes our planet and allows us to get back to some normal business. As I said, I'm putting all my money on Sandusky. I think we're going to see a surge. Thank you. All right, next item 4 are staff approvals. Tom?
Tom, you're muted.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chairman, there were no staff signage approvals submitted over this past month, so we have nothing to report on this item.
Okay. The only other thing maybe that we ought to talk about right now, Tom, is you broached the idea of starting time for our meetings. And I know Ryan expressed to us at our last meeting that a 5 o'clock start would better suit his work situation.
David Beer.
Do we have any other members that have an opinion? I'm okay with if we want to move to 5 o'clock.
I would, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would support a 5 o'clock as well. That seems to be in line with the other commissions.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with the 5.
Okay, somebody make a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I make a motion that our next meeting be at 5 o'clock and thereafter.
Thank you, sir. Second.
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 John seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Tom, can we assume that we will start next month with our 5 o'clock time?
I don't believe that should be any conflict. I can be in communication with the applicants for next month about that. So that should, unless you hear otherwise, that should be fine.
Okay, everybody assume it's 5 then.
Okay.
Other business, we have language that was distributed to you under section 1161, certificate of appropriateness. I'll let members know that the language that you received has not yet been fully reviewed by our administrative staff internally and our city law director. That will be taking place. I think we also will need to reach out to the Planning Commission because we don't have the authority to create these changes in language. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I believe that's got to go through planning at some point.
That's correct.
But the idea is to express our concerns through language that maybe can be shaped by our law director and the Planning Commission at some point to address some of these issues that we've been talking about for some time. The first one is one of concern, and again, this has not been reviewed by the law director, but I'm asking if included in the application, could we write language that would require any exterior work that someone jumps ahead and performs without going through the certificate of appropriateness and a building permit, that they would have to bring the property back to original condition and or pay applicable fines and receive approval from the city building department and division of code compliance in order to proceed with the application process. And here's the point I'm trying to make. I don't think our commission should be the enforcer. I think that has to go back to city enforcement. I think we've got to have some stopgate that prohibits somebody going ahead and building without going through the process and then asking us to give forgiveness. We've seen those in the past, and this attempts to address that. questions or comments? That would come under C1. D11 is on the whole issue of internally lit signs. This would pretty much nail it down, but give us an out if there was a compelling historic circumstance that was established by planning. An example that comes to mind is like the State Theater. That would still give us the opportunity to say yes under certain conditions, but for the most part, it would prohibit lit signs, digital message boards. Comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
In light of all the, well, I shouldn't say potential development, I should say. I like that form-based, the zoning and the building plans with the divines elevation. I think that's going to come in really important with Battery Park and close to the water. If you look at Chicago, the Burnham plan, you can't build past Shoreline Drive there. And the height, I think in Sandusky, they built on the water and everybody grabbed those up. And inside of that, nobody built a thing there. So I think that elevation is important, specifications. And like tonight, I'd like to see a real specific design plan of this deck. It'd make more sense. So I agree with you on this one, totally. I'd like to push for this.
Ryan Nagel, I think this came from the language you helped us with from the city of Cleveland. Do you have any comments, Ryan?
No, I mean, I think it falls in line with their intent. I think it's a really good start. Yes. May need some tweaks, but
sure,
have to think a little bit more about that and take another look at theirs. Again, it's been a while since I reviewed theirs. We haven't been in front of Landmarks since COVID started, but I definitely think it's a good start.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you for continuing to bring these up. And I know these are changes that both the city and this commission have noticed that have needed to be addressed. I do just want to provide to this commission some bigger context too. And I know our new planning commission chair, Commissioner Murray, has expressed there's a strong desire to really take a comprehensive look at our zoning issues. And to Commissioner Minder's point too, I think there's a lot of comprehensive things that we can do to modernize our code. But that being said, I do think there's small pieces like this here and there where we can continue to make improvements, and that staff is definitely looking to work on making these adjustments as needed. And with Brendan and Mr. Heil and Mr. Holliday as Community Development Director now, bringing his experience from Euclid, I think we now have a good team to be able to really kind of review these internally, bring them back for this commission and the Planning Commission. So I'm excited for that. So just another clarification on steps. So typically how these ordinance changes have worked in the past, the Landmark Commission, once it finalizes language, does make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission approves them as a zoning change, and then they are sent to City Commission for final approval. So, so I just wanted to provide that larger context for this as well.
Great, thank you, Tom. 6, 7, and item 6, item 7, and item G all really relate to demolition plans. As you saw with the Market Street building connected to the complex, we had multiple issues. So I took a shot at trying to pin down more specifics again. If someone is proposing a demolition, I'd like to see more specific plans, methodology, how they're going to coordinate with the city building department, timelines, and include how the environment and structures attached or in close proximity to the demolition site be protected and preserved. I'm not sure on the following one, number 7, that I really raised the question again, maybe this is for the law director, on should they be required to, and maybe they already are and we're just not aware of it, propose that they have liability insurance coverage that protects damage to property and environment in close proximity to the demolition. And then finally, I really believe if we're going to consider a demolition application, that the community ought to have the ability to provide input in a open public session. And they need time to first understand that that's being proposed. And thus I put in there that there should be some sort of notification to the public at least 60 days in advance that allows them to participate in some way. Comments or thoughts on those 3?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Comments on 6 and 7. Typically, it's been my experience that, when we submit, we knocked down a garage here in a historic district a couple years ago, and part of our applying for a demolition permit, plans from the architect and engineer that address these things were required as part of that. Now, at the city of Sandusky, I don't know if that's the case or not with building, but, from my experience, that responsibility is held with the building department. The Landmarks Commission here that I've worked with is simply says yay or nay, and kind of it's contextual with, the historic building fabric. It's not so much as, their methodology, and, the building department's responsible for that, for that. And so is, their liability coverage insurance. Your general contractor, demo contractor is going to be required to have that, but it's through, again, it's another one that's through building and housing. That wouldn't necessarily be something that they're required to provide to Landmarks Commission. So those 2 things are kind of, at least in the city of Cleveland, are held with building and housing department, not so much Landmarks.
Tom, are you aware of any of that with the city of Sandusky? Do we have those in place?
Through Mr. Chairman. So what I would suggest is, as part of our internal review of these things, is speaking with the Division of Building and ensuring, and then conveying to this commission, which I think would be helpful, the processes by which the building division looks at those applications and all of those particulars. And so that's definitely something that we will do, and whether new language in the landmark ordinance is required, or just working with the building division to make sure that all that information is conveyed to the Landmark Commission, just so that they know that these things are being taken a look at, something that we can look at internally.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking for, not necessarily suggesting that we create language, but what I'm looking for is more than verbal assurance that they do these things. I want to see something that is in writing, that's part of an ordinance that must be followed.
Yeah, I agree. I think them supplying those things to us is a good idea so that we can have eyes on it. But as far as, an engineer looking at it and saying, well, that's, if you do this, that could happen, shouldn't, be the responsibility of this commission. It should be on the building department to say, yes, we have your engineer drawings as part of the demolition, and this is, we bless this.
Mr. Chair.
This is Brendan. I can chime in on the liability insurance coverage portion quickly. I am very confident that that is a requirement, as Ryan pointed out, of the process. If you're going to demolish a structure in Sandusky, the contractor must have some pretty robust insurance coverage in order to undertake that process. Who they submit that to at the city side, I don't know off the top of my head, but it definitely exists for these projects.
Yeah, that would be my next question, Brendan, is who examines that? So for an example, when the Cook complex was taken down, they did damage to a building that was part of that property that that it was damaged. So the question would be, did the insurance get as specific as covering the damage to that building?
That specific example, I don't know. Although I guess I think the damage was to a building that was owned by the same person, right? So I don't think it would be an insurance issue at all. But I don't know specifically about that example.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, what we're
Yeah.
talking fundamentally is a process question at the city that is bigger than our commission. While obviously we have concerns about the process and making sure the process is appropriately A, in place, and B, being followed. I just wonder whether there's a role for staff here to come to us with an explanation of what the process is, be it in the form of a flow chart or something that shows, how these things progress through the sausage machine and which bits of legislation apply to them. And then between us and planning and staff, we can identify any gaps that are there. There's clearly more pieces to this than just our commission, is my point.
Right. Absolutely agreed.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
To Mr. Griffith's point, staff would be happy to get a fuller picture and lay that all out for this commission. And I do think these processes exist. These processes do exist in the building division, and we'd be happy to bring them more specifically to show this commission.
I think that would help because we have yet to review an application where there were violations of city ordinances, and I'm still unclear as to the degree to which our staff was fully engaged in those and what is supposed to take place, what did take place, what didn't take place. And I think that's important for us to know. Otherwise, what happens as a result is it comes to us and all of a sudden we're in the chair of being an enforcer. And that's one of the things I think we want to avoid.
Agreed.
Dr. Berkey, or Mr. Chairman, I like the idea that you're lighting a spark. So this is something that's bugged me for my whole life because, this goes beyond the historic buildings. It's with GNC Foundry, Esmond Dairy, American Crayon. I think that we should nail this all down. A fire damaged building, there's so many structures are just left sitting half vacant or half falling down or dangerous. I like to I think that at this level we should start it, send it up to planning, send it to commission, and we should nail this down.
Thank you.
Agreed.
And I think if we do this in a very thoughtful way, in a specific way, it actually makes it easier for our developers. They know what the rules are.
Agreed.
If we eliminate some of this vagueness, I think everybody wins. Any other thoughts? One other thing I want to bring up, maybe Ryan can comment on this. I have a concern about when you look down Shoreline Drive and you look at the backs of buildings, and maybe Tom can speak to this in terms of the city. I don't like seeing air conditioning units on the back of buildings. I don't like to see electrical panels planted on the back of buildings. And it raises the issue of, could you not have put that panel in the basement of that building? Could you not have taken that air conditioning unit, and put it on top of the building out of sight? Yes, it's more expensive, but as we look to the future, do we want to see all those on the backs of buildings as you're driving down the street or walking down the street? And I don't know where that goes, whose umbrella that falls under, but I would say from our perspective, historical preservation's perspective, it sure deteriorates from the historical view of buildings.
Mr. Chairman, I could provide a brief answer to that. I agree with that, and as that I think would seemingly fall under a provision in our preservation design guidelines. And I think when Shoreline Drive was reconstructed, and specifically that the intent was to create less of a back end space on these buildings and more of a two-fronted space. And I think as businesses continue to see that it's now usable space behind the buildings, that there will probably be incentive to relocate those so they're less of a visual eyesore and less of a hindrance to people utilizing patios or sidewalks. But going forward, I definitely think it's it's something that we've talked internally about, is including some specifications to any additional uses in the future to make sure they're screened or relocated or not just out in the public right of way. So that that's something that with the completion of Shoreline Drive has been discussed.
So maybe in planning some language that would say when it is possible to do that.
Yeah, and additionally, one other piece that we had talked about last year, right before COVID hit, was looking at the gas meters that are being put in the public right of way in front of buildings, and looking to see if there's any way to mitigate the intrusiveness of those. There's really not much choice in where those are located, but there are ways you can try to make them seem less obtrusive.
Ryan Nagel, do you have any other thoughts on that or experiences?
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with that here in Ohio City. There's a screening requirement for condensing units on buildings, for example. On rooftops, they can't be visible from sidewalk. If they are, there's minimum parapet heights for new buildings. On existing buildings, there's a screening requirement. So that is people seem to get away with it for electrical meters and gas. And I think it's the gas companies that are driving a lot of those gas meters. And with Sandusky being on bedrock there, that could have something to do with it. Right. I know in our new building we just built, we designed this building and the gas company said, this thing has to go there and that's it. And we pushed back on it. They said, listen, this is where it needs to go. Jogging it around here that way is going to be, X amount of dollars more. And so people just kind of go with it. But
okay. Any other thoughts on language? Anything else? All right. So our plan would be, Tom, to share this internally and maybe with planning. I don't think. I think we're going to need some guidance on what language we should be preparing and which really falls under maybe their umbrella. So for next meeting, why don't we do this as members? Again, review this language and any other areas that you have a concern, and bring it to us so that we can not formally adopt language, but give Tom direction in terms of sharing it with planning and trying to get some assistance from them in taking care of our concerns. Anything else for the good of the order? Thanks for your patience. This is a long one, but I think we got quite a bit accomplished. Thank you much. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Second. We're out of here. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Thank you. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank you.